This is a talk about taste. Not just about taste, really, but about the radical idea that if we focus our attention on the way our food tastes, we can actually improve the way our food system functions and possibly even deliver better, more wholesome, more delicious food to everyone. Over the last 2 years, as part of the James Beard Foundation's annual food conference, I've been traveling around the country conducting a series of meetings with diverse stakeholders in our food system: chefs, farmers, academics, philanthropists, even many of the people in this room, in fact. And we've asked them to comment on what are the issues that they consider to be the most important in the future of food, and also to brainstorm creative ideas for solutions. And to my surprise, the one topic that never comes up is taste. And while on the one hand, I understand the omission, perhaps not everyone can see what taste has to do with the environmental impact of our food production, or even with public health for that matter. But on the other hand, for me, taste is so fundamental to food that I can't imagine any meaningful vision of the future of our food system that doesn't take taste into account. And I understand that taste is a complicated and even a controversial subject. In fact, ever since Aristotle first proposed his hierarchy of the senses, philosophically speaking, taste has been relegated to the realm of the banal. Surprise. Considered too subjective because the taster actually has to come into physical contact with the object being tasted. Taste was always considered, and to this day is considered, less noble than higher senses, sight and hearing, for example. And to see evidence of this today, all you really have to do is imagine the institutions and the money dedicated to the visual arts or to music versus those dedicated to flavor, of which I think the Beard Foundation might be the only one. But there are other ways to think about taste, obviously, and this is one of the simplest. This is the tongue, or our sense of taste. And this diagram shows how taste buds aggregate to form papillae, which are located on our tongues and in our mouths and even in our gullets, we now know. And as we eat, ions and proteins pass through these taste receptors and they send messages to our brains about the food. But like many things in the body, of course, taste is not as simple as we once thought. When I was a kid, there were only 4 tastes: sweet, sour, salty, bitter. Now, as you can see, there's 5 tastes: umami. We use a Japanese word just to complicate things. It's really the taste of glutamate, and experts believe there are many more tastes and taste reception mechanisms out there to be discovered. But further complicating our sense of taste is that it isn't a discrete sense. That is, that actually our sense of taste mingles with our sense of smell in our brains, and together in our head, as soon as the brain gets involved, it gets pretty complicated, but together we create this idea of flavor, as the neurogastronomist Gordon Shepherd has shown recently. I say neurogastronomy. He's actually a neuroscientist who's proposed a theory of neurogastronomy. But there are other ways to think of taste, too, obviously. And this is one of my favorites. It's one of our favorites. This is taste as personal preference, or taste as a form of market research. And in America, I think that this is one of our favorite ways of thinking about taste, in part because we think that personal opinions are the most important here, but also because American companies have used those opinions to engineer foods that we love: beefy burgers, sweet sodas, salty snacks, chocolatey desserts. Many of the foods that are the product of market research have become foods associated with American identity. The problem with market research, though, when we're talking about taste, is that it really looks backwards and not forwards. And what I mean by that is that taste preferences draw on our taste experiences, on our taste memories. It's very difficult to imagine a taste we've never had that one day we might love. We've all had the experience of acquiring tastes, and that's a concept I think we sometimes forget. We spend a lot of time thinking about developing the taste in children, and sometimes I think we forget that adult tastes change also. Market research never really gives us any new tastes. It just gives us more of the same tastes. So things get sweeter, they get saltier, they get crunchier, they get more fried. But there is yet another way, one final way I want to talk about taste before I get into some interesting stories, and that is taste not as personal preference or as even physiology, but taste as a form of social construct. Don't spend too much time on the details of this. I'm going to tell you the idea. This is called the field of gastronomy, and it's an idea proposed by the sociologist Priscilla Parkhurst Ferguson at Columbia University based on research by the late, great French sociologist Pierre Bourdieu. And what this is really is an imaginary space where everyone who has anything to do in the food world, me, you, anyone who cooks, any organizations, any publications, kind of duke out through a series of machinations what's good, what's bad, what's hot, what's not, what's in, what's out. It's a theory of cultural production. It's a theory of taste. And the power, it's really a diagram of power, and the power that is represented here is a combination of two things. Across the horizontal axis is economic capital, and that's the money. That's someone who has a lot of money and can have a lot of influence. But more interestingly, on the vertical axis is cultural capital. That's the respect someone has in a field, or the ability that someone has to influence influencers, let's say. And I'll give you an example, because it's a little bit complicated, as everything Pierre Bourdieu ever did. I'll give you an example of how this might work. Let's say that one day Mario Batali wakes up and decides that spaghetti and meatballs are going to be the next big thing. And don't ask why. He knows that foodies know that they're not authentically Italian, whatever, it doesn't matter. But Mario starts to talk about spaghetti and meatballs on his daily talk show, and he starts to tweet about them to his 250,000 followers, and he starts to serve them in his restaurants. And then suddenly there are recipes for spaghetti and meatballs in magazines, and then there are food trucks in Manhattan that sell spaghetti and meatballs. And then some blogger somewhere proclaims spaghetti and meatballs are the new pizza. That's probably me. I do those sorts of things all the time. I have said so many things are the new cupcake that now I have to talk about the new cupcake. The point is that Mario Batali has a mass following. He has the respect of other chefs. He has a few Beard Awards even. And he has, with these things, he has the power to influence a cultural shift, to add to the cultural currency of spaghetti and meatballs in a way that no immigrant cook who's been eating them for generations and cooking them could ever do. This is sort of the field of gastronomy at work. My point is that taste is as much about power and class as it is about preference or the molecules on our tongues. Tastes are created and they are cultural, and because of that, I think that they can be used as a tool for social change. In America, an emphasis on taste is considered frivolous or even indulgent, sometimes even undemocratic. The notion that a client in a soup kitchen would refuse food because of the way it tastes is anathema to our concept of charity. Taste is one way that the 1% distinguishes itself from the 99%, as Bourdieu showed long before anyone occupied Wall Street. But what if we could take taste, or at least the taste for food, out of this equation? What if we could imagine that the best tasting foods, the best ingredients, were the right of everyone? There are examples of this kind of egalitarian approach to eating, and like many stories about good food, I'm going to take you to Italy. This is Valentina. Valentina is a farmer in the Sant'Ambrogio market in the center of Florence, and we met when I was co-directing a graduate class on Italian food culture about 10 years ago. And as soon as Valentina heard what we were doing there, she invited all of our students, all 30 of us, to her family's farm for dinner. And so the next day, we got everyone on a local bus. Their farm is one of the last farms within the city limits. And we rode out to the end of the line, and you have to walk through a Warner Brothers Cineplex that's built on land they used to farm to get to their kind of ramshackle home. And we all filed into this space, and literally every one of us had a meal that changed our lives. I mean, they told us amazing stories. Her mother and her brother and her aunt, they farmed for 14 generations. But the food was incredible. We had pasta al pomodoro with heirloom Fiorentini tomatoes that they grow. We had just picked arugula with olive oil and red wine vinegar they make. We had wild boar prosciutto that they cure. We had honey and cheese from nearby farms. And no one left that day without an amazing realization that these people eat better than most of us eat here in New York, these wealthy, affluent NYU students, and even those who aren't. Let me take you to another place that we always bring our students. This is the Castello di Verrazzano. It's a beautiful winery south of Florence in the Chianti Valley, owned by a very wealthy family, obviously. And we always tour the area. We see the beautiful vistas. We walk through the restored winemaking facilities, and then we sit down for lunch. And it was during lunch, shortly after we had visited Valentina's farm, that I had this realization. We were eating food almost exactly the same as Valentina served us. We had pasta al pomodoro. We had wild boar prosciutto that they cure on the property. We had, obviously, their olive oils and their wine vinegars. We had local honey. We had local cheese. And I thought to myself, I could never imagine anywhere in these two very diverse socioeconomic environments in America that a group of guests would have the exact same meal of the highest quality. And I submit to you that not only is this something that we need to be able to imagine, but it's something we have to make possible. I began by saying that this was a talk about taste, and then I said that tastes were the product of physiology, of our personal preference, and also of power. But really, this Italian story shows that all of these elements are underlined by the society's values, that tastes are really about our society's values. And we just so happen to live in a moment right now where our tastes coincide with what people believe are the best for us and the best for our planet. This isn't always the case. It happens to be a moment right now. I'm talking about local seasonal produce. I'm talking about products from animals that are humanely raised. I'm talking about processed foods with the fewest chemical additives and unnatural ingredients. These have been shown to be the most nourishing. They've been shown to be the least demanding of the Earth's resources. They happen to be the favorite of chefs. It was actually a great chef the other day who said to me, the best grown, best tasting foods don't just nourish us because of the nutrients they give to our bodies, but they have something more. They satisfy our appetites. They nourish our souls. And I would say to you that how, in good conscience, I would ask you, can we deny this form of nourishment from anyone, regardless of how much money they have, regardless of their taste? And while I understand that it is difficult to change a society's relationship to taste, and probably even more difficult to change any individual's personal preferences, I believe that any fundamental change to our food system has to begin with a very simple question, and that question is, how does it taste? A focus on taste will lead us to make better decisions about how and where we grow our food, how we distribute and store it, how we market and how we prepare it, and even the policies that we enact to ensure a better, more wholesome, more sustainable, and certainly more delicious future for everybody. Thank you.